Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Eating at a Meeting. I am in Pittsburgh today for this week for the Society of Government Meeting Professionals. And so I'm excited to chat with them and see what's going on with government meeting planning. But not skipping a beat. Rachael Riggs is my friend and industry leader on a mission to create a more sustainable and healthy event. And you are the you're with Maritz Global Events, and what's your exact title?
That's correct. I am the well-being leader.
The well-being leader. Yay. We all need to be well. Yes.
True story.
You and I have been chatting about well-being for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
A long time.
Yes,
when you were with Vancouver.
Yes, ma'am.
Right? Yeah.
My life's passion is to bring well-being and events together.
Well, and that's very important. And because we plan lots of events for lots of people, and we want people to be well, even though I literally was just telling you just before we went live is that I was talking to somebody who's trying to give smoothies and healthy food at her event. And they're like, no, we want donuts. And she's like, no, I want to plan. I need you to be well. And
exactly.
So finding that balance. And so tell us, how do we find that balance? And I know you've got the 5 dimensions of well-being.
Yes,
so
ma'am.
Is that where it comes from? Can you just talk about that and we'll understand it all?
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you first for having me. And it's nice to be here and be a part of this. So the journey that Tracy alluded to earlier is I have been on this journey through my entire career, quite honestly. I started out, I have a degree in kinesiology and exercise physiology. I wanted to be a corporate fitness instructor and run Apple's corporate fitness program out in Cupertino back in the day. And I went to work for the Association for Fitness and Business and really, really wanted to go down that route, but fell in love with the events business. And so then that started my journey. And the reason why I wanted to bring these two together is because I saw people in the corporate world come out of their 4 walls when they traveled, and then they would just have all these amazing programs when they're working in the office, but then they travel and they would just, all the walls would come down, and we all have to let go every once in a while. I get that. That's not what we're trying to say. But at the same time, people need that support when they're out and about and traveling to meetings and events. So over the years of my career, I worked at Smith Buckland, then I went on the supplier side and worked for New York City as well as Vancouver. And Vancouver was my home for a very long time because it spoke to me from a personal perspective as well as a business perspective because they were practicing what I was preaching. And then I was at PCMA in 2018 and observed the behavior of no offense to us, the older generation and the younger generation, and how they took in meetings. And the seasoned professionals were 7 to 7, have a 5-minute break and go out and eat and drink until all hours of the night. But then I was watching the younger generation come in and they're balancing their workouts, their home life while they're online. They're trying to get their work done as well as balance everything and wanting to eat right, wanting to not skip workouts and so on and so forth. So that's when I approached Maritz Global Events and said, hey, I see that this is converging. Could we study it? And of course, David Peckinpah and Greg Bogue were all over it. And we worked, yes, they're amazing. We worked and did 3 different research studies. This is pre-pandemic. So this is, like I said, 2018. So we did 3 research studies, 2 internal, 1 external, went in front of our customer advisory board and really tried to understand what people want. And then I was hired Christmas Eve of 2019. But then I gave a big notice because I'd been in Vancouver for 16 years and started on March 2nd of 2020. And then we all know what happened, right? So a new product, a new service, a new philosophy, if you will. Maritz has always been really good about taking good care of each other, but this was a tool that we would work with our clients to engage in their events. And that was the last thing people really needed. They were worried about canceling and so on and so forth. And so then I started doing some work in the virtual events, but it was all based on the 5 dimensions of well-being. And the 5 dimensions, we originally started at the 8, and then we narrowed it down to 5. And the 5 are personal well-being, career well-being, social well-being, environmental well-being, and financial well-being. So the theory is, and this is all in the, and we use the word well-being because well-being is a state of mind, whereas wellness is an activity. So if you're, so that's why we landed on the word well-being, because it's more of a state of being. And then the 5 dimensions, when those 5 dimensions are in balance, the person is really going to function at a very, it may not be optimal, but a very productive way. You know, we all have areas that we want to work on in those 5 areas, but it's really helping somebody be more balanced. And, you know, if you're financially stressed, it's going to take a little bit of toll on you. And if you're feeling isolated, that's going to take a toll on you. Or if you're not taking good care of yourself through personal well-being, it's going to take a toll on you. So there's a lot of ways to look at this. And the goal is to have that wheel rolling forward, not backwards or stopping, right? Yep. And so that's why we look at the 5 dimensions.
Well, and just thinking about all of them, I mean, and it's that balance. And I know you've got a graphic of it, and we can share that graphic later on, but it's a circle. And it's a wheel, and they all have to, they're kind of like spokes on your bicycle tire, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Or your bicycle. And
that's the analogy.
And if one gets smaller, finances are getting smaller because of COVID. We don't have any events, right? You know, and actually this morning in the keynote speech, Shauna Suko was talking about, where did you find yourself during COVID, right? And how are you rebound? What is your new normal in the morning, right? Are you waking up to reading all the news, which is like, oh my God, or are you waking up and watching dogs dancing, right?
Right.
And
exactly.
Yeah. And it plays into our meetings. No, it plays into our meetings.
Well, and the way we look at it is, obviously a person can look at these 5 dimensions and look at themselves in the way that they're operating. But we can look at those 5 dimensions and how we're planning meetings, right? And how where you look at, use the 5 dimensions as a way to design your event. And that's why I sit in the design studio at Maritz Global Events, because it's really about designing your event with the person at the heart of the experience. And so really taking that and designing the event. So what are your personal well-being activities? What are your social well-being activities? What are your environmental well-being activities? Meaning, how are you being sustainable at an event, and how are you doing all of those different practices? So it's taking those 5 dimensions and designing to it as well.
Okay, so I want to ask a question about the financial one. So what's the financial well-being for an attendee? How do you look at it that way?
Good point. Good question. So it's really looking at their, making sure their investment is worthwhile. If they're, making sure their costs are kept at a minimum, making sure that they're looking at the cost of airfare. That is so challenging right now, but making sure that when they put that mindset around, I need to look at my financial well-being as an attendee for this event. It's making sure they're staying within their budget, making sure that they're making good choices from a financial perspective, but also, could I have taken that Bird scooter instead of an Uber? Or could I have, looking at those activities as a person, but also looking at it from a guest's well-being at the event. Does that make sense to you?
It makes complete sense. And I'm going to tie it to food real quick because I talk about that in an aspect of finances for the attendee. I mean, Maritz is sending you to because I'm here, it's SGMP. Maritz is sending you to SGMP. You have a budget to spend.
Yep.
They don't accommodate your dietary restrictions. And even though and SGMP, you're doing a great job. So don't get me wrong, but XYZ conference, right? They ask you, but then they don't accommodate them. So you, Rachel, have to go off site.
Right.
And like me last night, paid $21 to have dinner because I wanted some vegetables. Right. And so I've now just spent more money of my company's dollar, Maritz. For me personally, that's my own budget. And it's taken me away from the networking opportunity, which my company sent me there to do. So I think that's a whole nother, that's all those 5 dimensions all wrapped into one as well.
Absolutely. And that's the cool thing about the 5 dimensions is they all roll into each other to keep that, that wheel rolling forward. For example, sustainability, right? We classify that as environmental well-being because we need to really make sure that we're making wise choices. On Google Flights now, you can see the carbon footprint of a flight, which I think is super cool.
Even on Google Maps, walking or driving.
Yes,
yeah.
Right. Isn't that awesome? I mean, that's the kind of stuff we really need to pay attention to. And we are actually doing a lot of work with clients on the carbon footprint of their event. And so we co-created a tool with one of our partners to actually measure the carbon footprint of a meeting, which is new to all of us, right? I mean, there's not a lot. I mean, yes, there are experts in the industry that do it, but it's for the average event professional. Not everybody's versed in that. And so it's really quite something to have people learn more and more about that, because if after COP26, which was held in November of last year, it's, that's the governments and all of the world leaders coming together talking about how industry needs to be more sustainable for the climate crisis, so on and so forth. And the events industry until then had never really put a stake in the ground. And we have a big footprint, a very big footprint. And we need to be very cognizant of that between the food waste and the food that we order and all of that. We need to do it in a more sustainable way. And it's my belief, if we don't, we're going to get regulated, and we don't want that.
Right. Oh, so, that's very true. Yeah.
Right.
Let's regulate ourselves. Yeah.
We made a commitment, Maritz Global Events has made a commitment to be net zero by 2050. And we signed the net zero carbon events commitment too, which I encourage everybody to go out and take a look at. And we are really, the newest project that I'm working on is really measuring our own carbon footprint, because we need to understand with Maritz, with our headquarters in Fenton, as well as our 11 other offices for all of the Maritz Holdings companies, we need to understand what that is to make that net zero by 2050. So we're really taking a look inside, as well as how we plan events for clients.
Well, and I think that's really important. And me, even as a solopreneur, need to look at that as well. I'm like, what am I? And I live with my parents. And so teaching my mom's good at recycling now, right? She's got it down. And where do we put this in, and how do we do that? But like, even this trip, I'm on a 3-week trip.
Right.
And I am staying in Pittsburgh 2 extra days to financially support my airline ticket, because it was going to double my price of my airline ticket if I went 1 extra trip. So how do you finagle all of that together to be? And I am looking at, this is the more on Delta, this is the fastest route that I can get there. Right. And how can you also the most economical at the same time? But it'd be interesting, as a speaker on food and beverage, and I've pitched this to some of my clients. I'm like, you're hiring me to speak on this topic, so let me help you work with this on your food and beverage side of it, or talk about it. Let's talk about what you're doing at this event. Right. And it's amazing how many don't take me up on that. Right.
And that to me is key. And Tracy, keep plugging that, because that's what we need as an industry. Yeah. People don't understand choosing one meatless meal can make a huge difference in your carbon emissions for that event.
Yeah.
Huge. And people don't understand why. And the why is because, cattle are huge emitters of CO2. And telling my family that, they've all been like, what? They don't understand it. So it's all about education, right?
Right. Exactly.
And understanding where they can make a difference. And they don't, not everybody understands that. So communication is key.
Well, and my second session tomorrow is like the path to sustainable events, right? And it is a path. You don't have to do every single thing at one time, because my God, you would never leave your room because you would be so inundated with things to manage. Like pick, hey, we're going to do one meatless meal this entire conference, just one. You don't have to do it the whole day. You can just do one. Or you're going to make sure that we're recycling, or, this hotel is not doing any housekeeping at all. And it's probably a staffing issue, but that's, let's look about it on the sustainability side of that. What does that do? Right.
Exactly.
Let's look at the positive side of that.
Makes such a difference. And count those little things, because that makes a huge difference in your overall CO2 emissions. And one of the things that I've been doing with clients is really humanizing what that 409 tons of CO2 means. Because people don't quite get that, and so I have, we have calculations that we have validated through one of our partners of 409 tons of CO2 equals 45 million cell phones being charged. Believe it or not, CO2 emissions come from charging your phone. So it really takes that number that a meeting has emitted and puts it into something that people can really understand. Right. And so that's what's been really helpful. And I really believe people are genuinely interested and wanting to know how they can make a difference. They're just not quite sure how.
Well, and it's a lot of information coming at people from different directions, right? And how do you manage that? And how do you convince somebody, let's just do one thing, right? And that's literally all you need to do is, do you have a sustainability standard? Do you have maybe, hey, let's do the 5 dimensions of well-being. Let's look, that's the first step to your path to sustainability, right? So take that one little baby step to figure this out and how you're going to look at your conference differently. And you can say, hey, we accomplished this, and maybe do one of each thing, right? Right. And that's it. And that's what you're doing this year.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that I try to coach our clients on is put a stake in the ground, right? And this is how we're going to do it future forward. We're doing these 5 things, one thing, whatever it is today. The next event we'll do 2 or 7 or whatever it is. And nobody's an expert to do it all right away. They have to learn, they have to experience what doesn't work, what works. And then one of the things that I also highly recommend is, and I did this through the EIC, Events Industry Council, I got my Sustainable Event Professional Certificate. And it was just very helpful to remind you of things and teach you things about sustainability that you might not think of, like in terms of the downstream and the upstream recycling, and what you have to think about on all of that, and how, I just found it very, very helpful. And the EIC also has event standards that they have for sustainability. So I highly recommend people looking at that. And it's all just going to have to cultivate over time. And we're coming out of a really hard time, right? Right. And people are like, I'm drowning and I can't take on one more thing. So it's a hard position to be in. And I give our event professionals a lot of credit in this industry for just staying the course, keeping positive. And, there's a lot of different ways that people could have just gone, but we're coming back, and we're coming back strong. And I'm excited to see that.
Yeah, I agree. And I was talking to some suppliers down here, and they're like, we're busier than ever, and which is great. And we've got to see it in different markets and in different areas of where it's coming, but it is coming back. And we have to look at it from, how can we be better? Because in some respects, we're just going back to the same thing that we've always done. but let's look at our menus. Let's look at how we're getting people to commute, right? And I love the fact that for this conference, we're close to DC, people carpooled or from DC up to Pittsburgh, so they weren't flying and actually the CEO of the Pittsburgh CVB said, we have a trail that you can rent a bike and ride all the way to DC. It'll take you 5 days. But I'm like, I thought it was awesome because you can do that. Yeah. So, kind of like hike the Appalachian Trail to your conference, but not really. But I think those are just like kind of the little steps that you can put in there. And even, I remember going, and this is when you were still at Vancouver, when MPI WEC was there, and I had just worked the Olympics. So I was coming back and I love Vancouver, but the napkins, the beverage napkins that the convention center was like, when we built this building, we did this to save the animals below the sea. And I just thought that was a simple way to share what they were doing. Because everybody kind of always looks at a beverage napkin, especially if it's got some writing on it. Right.
Yes.
So, So those are simple steps that you can do to take and share your stories. Right. Yep. And so
the power of that is like the power of a gift image on Instagram, right? It's a live Instagram, right?
Right. Yeah.
And yes, that program went over really well, and they were sustainable napkins. So, it doesn't, but it's just getting that messaging out there, and education's key.
Well, and one of the other things that I loved from that event, and I tell this story in my sustainability sessions, is that they got rid of the buses, right? And Vancouver's a very walkable city, and they did a shoe check. And so wear your tennis shoes. And I stayed at the YMCA. So I stayed out of the block. Sorry. I stayed at the Y. I know. And I wore my tennis shoes, carried my heels, wore my tennis shoes. And then I was able to check my tennis shoes in and put my heels on to walk around the show floor, which I'm not going to do anymore. Yes, I love that story and that experience because it encouraged people to walk. Yeah. And that's a whole nother thing about that 5 dimensions of well-being. It's like, let's look at how can we help you be better with your health, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. When I came on to Maritz, I created what's called our Well-Being Network. And and you remember.
Is that what? I'm a member of that. Yes. Thrive Meetings and Events is a member of Maritz Wellbeing Network. Yes.
And so it's a very small group of people because we want to curate these, or companies, not people. We want to curate very unique experiences around well-being. And one of the things that one of the partners is Heka Health. And Heka Health is a walking challenge app. And we designed these experiences, and we're getting ready to do one at WEC. It's a well-being challenge, and it's through the foundation of MPI, and essentially members or attendees can donate $5 to the charity, to the foundation, MPI Foundation, and then they get access to the app. And then the app is during WEC, and the chapter with the most steps, Maritz is going to give $1,000 to. The second chapter with the most steps will get $500. But the other thing that is happening in this experience, like you just said, is we're encouraging people to walk. We're encouraging people to, and it's all based on the 5 dimensions of well-being. So we've kind of created a scavenger hunt around the event about the healthy activities and how they can go to sustainability sessions and get bonus points for it. And it's all about, it's kind of a gamification of the live experience, and people can participate in person or virtually. And we've created an experience for everybody to really, no matter where they are, participate, right? And it's for a good cause, which is the MPI Foundation. And they give back to the community, they give back to the professionals, as we all know, through scholarships and sponsorships, and then chapters are the grassroots approach to it all. So it's going to be really cool. And the opening night of the event of WEC, we're going to be at Oracle Park, and you can walk from foul line to foul line and get extra steps, so you can double your steps by doing that. You can go and, we understand that people are not always walking everywhere and they have other activities that they like to do. So we have an activity tracker. So say you go into the gym and you run, or track it that way, but you say you go into the gym and do a kickboxing class. There's an activity tracker that calculates that into steps. And so you get credit for all of your activities. Because some people just, are not walkers or runners. They might want to do a Peloton class or what have you, depending on what's available. And so, and then people at home can track their Peloton classes or what have you. So it's a really cool experience.
Okay, so what about those individuals who utilize wheelchairs or have canes, and how do they do that activity tracker?
Sure, that's a really good question, Trace. And that activity tracker, there is handicap accessible activities in there so that they can get that credit. So, and then there's other pieces where you go in and you scan QR codes so they can get. So that is handy. It's all part of the experience. So we've kind of taken all of that into all different audiences into consideration. So it's very, very accessible, inclusive, and there's a lot of great activities. We also did this and put a different twist on it for IMAX Frankfurt, where we did a sustainability challenge. So it was based on the walking app. So you used your steps, but the gamification throughout the event is we featured all of the sustainable practices of the show. So the People and Planet Pledge, we actually gave bonus points for people when they signed up for the traffic cam so we could do the fight against human trafficking, and they could learn more about that. So it's not just about greening the event, it was more of the global sustainability, UN SDGs. So it was really cool to see everybody learning more as they go along. So I was really excited about that.
That's awesome. So what is the hottest topic that Maritz is seeing around well-being?
Environmental
well-being. Environmental. Okay. That's awesome.
People, it's personal well-being and environmental well-being right now.
Okay.
And then the third coming into that is social well-being, is creating community. So those are our hottest topics right now. I can tell you I've been on 4 calls in the last 2 days about measuring carbon footprint. Really?
Okay. Wow.
So what's happening is corporations, and it's really in the corporate side. Association has is more about community. Corporations more about sustainability in what I'm seeing right now. The regulations and reporting of ESG, environment, social, and governance, is being ramped up, right? And so the government is requiring corporations to really adhere to more stringent requirements. While meetings weren't happening, they didn't really question that, right? Now meetings are happening again, and their sustainability teams are coming in saying, we need to understand the carbon footprint of that event, because it's going to roll up into our overall calculation of how we report out in those. So I have major corporations coming at us saying we need help doing that. So that's what we're finding. But then in the design itself of events, we're really looking at talking to clients in terms of personal well-being, not starting events as late or as early as 6 a.m., starting them a little bit later so they have that time to have that personal space in the morning, and then trying to create a variety, an inclusive variety of activities in that morning space. So we had our event, which is called Next in Seattle last August, and we had a running club and a walking club, because I don't believe if you say 5K, it scares some people. So we partnered with Weston Run Concierge Program, and they map it out based on people's needs, and people got what they wanted. But we also had a yoga, beginner and intermediate yoga, hot yoga. And then we also had a self-defense class, which
awesome.
Loved. They absolutely loved, and they got a lot out of it, because we all could use our skills fine-tuned in self-defense, right? And so it was really cool. We're going to bring that back for our show or our event this year as well. So there's a lot that's prioritizing that personal well-being, focusing on the menu, obviously in the design is super, super important, as you know. I did an article on no more donut walls.
Yep.
I mean, none of us need the sugar. We've had, none of us need that sugar. And I get they taste good, but it's just not healthy. And I love them. I love them, but it's not what we need.
It is not what we need. And one of the things that I bring up in a couple of my sessions is that sugar used to be able to be purchased by an apothecary or at an apothecary, because the apothecary knew, like, way when we had, and there's apothecaries now, but you could only buy them because they knew what the ramifications were. I mean, it does give you a high and then it's a big, huge drop. And so, and we are constantly eating sugar, which is also carbs. And so all those carbs, and I mean, let's just kill us with the pastries in the morning and the donuts and that right after that at 10 a.m. Right. And all of these carbs and sugar, people are going to fall asleep. And that's what my friend Deidre was saying today. She's like, I don't really want to give you all that stuff because I want you to stay awake for these classes that you're here for. Mm-hmm. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's really, the event professional really needs to think about that as you so profess. And I'm so proud of you for all that you've done in this industry and how you've changed the thinking. But I mean, we need to think about the productivity of the human throughout the day. Mm-hmm. It's not just about fulfilling fun desires of good food, not crappy food, for lack of a better term. Yeah. Right? And we need to fuel them so that we get the best out of them. And that is something that you have been so great in professing, and I'm proud of you for it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And it reminds me of this other woman that came, and this was a couple of years ago. She's like, everyone in my group is pretty overweight, obese, and I want to feed them well. And she's like, what do I tell them? I'm like, while they're with you under your dime and you're in charge, you're their mom, right? Yeah. You're responsible for their food and beverage for the next 3 days. This is what you're going to eat. If you need to go outside and get something from somewhere else, go get it on your own dime, right? You can't charge it back. And it kind of goes back a little bit to WeWork when they said, we will only expense vegan meals. Mm-hmm. You know, even if you travel, we will not expense if you go buy a hamburger, right? Which I get I think it's a little bit too far to the right at some point, you know, but if you're only requiring that vegan food is served inside your building, that's a whole nother thing. But when I'm traveling, you know, you got to find that balance at the same time.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that with how we approach well-being, it's just finding that balance, right? You know, some people are just going to want to go back to the way it was prior to the pandemic. And that's their choice. And we have freedom of choice here. But we as event professionals need to take on that responsibility, in my opinion, of making sure we provide healthy choices. Right.
Exactly. Well, and it's funny because my mom's like, I carry 2 suitcases now no matter where I go, because I have I have my orange roll, you know, I've got to roll out my hips and roll out my back. But over there in the corner is also my acupressure mat. Right. And it's a bunch of golf shoe things on a mat, and I lay on it because it helps me with my Zen or whatever you call it in the morning to get me ready for the day. And I'm going to bring that extra suitcase so that I can do that, because no gym has those. But so when we talk about food and beverage, and because there's a whole level of food and beverage here too, doing a session today called Eating at a Meeting, from RFP to Execution or to Service. And to me, it's about the menu, but it's also about giving back to the community with that food and beverage.
Yep.
And that's part of that social well-being you were mentioning.
Agreed. And one of the things that I find that I hear this over and over, I talk to many people about it in IMAX, is how can we get that barrier down of donating food, right? Mm-hmm. And I haven't explored this all that much just yet, but I know of the company because she was a CNN
Gooder.
Gooder. Yeah.
Yep. I met her. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I just think that is the coolest thing ever. Yeah. And so we were all contemplating how we get her into our industry a little bit more. And I just, I think that is something that she's just amazing.
She is.
So that's that social well-being piece, is giving back to the community, making a lasting impact. And that's part of, like you just said, social well-being. And I think that there are so many opportunities out there to do that, and we just need to uncover it. But it takes time, right?
It does.
And it takes time, and that's where our industry is fast-paced, and we've got to build in those frameworks, the checklists, what have you, to make sure that all happens in our planning cycle.
Well, and it is, and designing my session today, I'm like, I've got all these things, BEOs, RFPs, whatever. And I'm like, oh, food and beverage shows up here. Oh, food and beverage. I'm like, food and beverage shows up in a lot of places that you don't think about. We just take for granted. And so I'm like, all right, I can't make my session 2.5 hours long. I got 60 minutes, right? So here's what we're going to talk about. But I am going to make a comment here. I listened to a webinar a couple of months ago from Food Tank. And it was with a couple of people interviewing, but it was with how the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act is actually being updated.
Yes.
Because everybody one, people don't know it exists.
Right.
And I had that event. So it's like, we have to make it easier.
Yes.
To make those donations. And so I just posted the link to that article on it, and I want to get, because it's actually, she is one of the experts on it, is Emily from the Harvard Law School Food Law and Policy Clinic. And I really want to get her on here to talk about it, because it's really, it really impacts our industry. But I think, and I'm going to let you speak to this, I think our industry, we wear black like you're wearing, and we stay behind the scenes.
Yes.
Right. And I think that's hurt us during COVID. It hurts us a lot in general. Because people don't know what we do.
Exactly.
And
totally agree. That's not, that's my mindset, right? Has been my mindset my whole career, is be behind the scenes, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're making things happen. And making it, and you don't want to be obvious about it. And that's what we do, but it's also kind of our own worst enemy too, right? Because we don't, not promote, but we're not self-promoters. We're not self-promoters on what we do. And I think that's the personally the appeal for me to the industry. And it's hard sometimes, and we're coming out of it. I mean, I never thought I would be keynote speaker at an event, and I'm going to be the keynote speaker at Pharma Forum coming in September. So I'm super excited about that, but it's all about well-being, and this is all, this is a pure passion for me. And that's, I think we're, as an industry, coming into our own skin, if you will. And COVID helped us do that. I mean, we've been around forever, obviously, but at the same time, we are an industry worth reckoning with, right? I mean, we just have so much to give, and we can make such a huge difference, and we move mountains if we
do.
So I think that we need to be a little bit more bullish in our approach to how we do things. And to your point, giving back socially through food and beverage, and giving and helping people that are less fortunate is a huge way to make that happen. And I think that there's a huge opportunity there.
I 100% agree. And one of the questions that I asked you, or I ask everybody beforehand, and we've got like 5 more minutes, is that how is it tied to what you're doing, tied to the UN Sustainable Development Goals? And I know a bunch of people probably don't even know what those are, but go look at them, unsdg.com, I think. And
.com. Yep.
.com. Yeah. And look at it, and everything that we do in our industry can touch on all 17 of those sustainable development goals.
Yes. In fact, and so what we do at Maritz Global Events is we have two frameworks, the UN SDGs and the 5 Dimensions of Wellbeing. And every time I was talking to either a planner internally or externally, they're like, the UN SDGs are so lofty, and I don't know how I can make a difference in that. And so one day I was looking at the 5 Dimensions of Wellbeing and looking at the UN SDGs, and I started plotting the UN SDGs to the 5 Dimensions of Wellbeing, and it works perfectly because so I have a slide, and I'm happy to share it with you. Is lean into the 5 dimensions, and you're leaning into the UN SDGs because people can think of 5 a little bit easier than they can think of 17, right?
Right.
Yep. And so it's something that I truly believe that you can go left to right on this slide, not really easily right to left, which the left is the 5 dimensions and the right is the UN SDGs. And so I believe when we're leaning into the 5 dimensions, we're leaning into the sustainable development goals. Yep. And you can take measurable actions on those 5 dimensions and then show how you're leaning into the UN SDGs. In fact, in our carbon footprint measurement tool that I do for our meetings, we layer design insights on that, and I created a scorecard of how events are leaning into the UN SDGs based on their design principles. And so, and then I have the scorecard on the UN SDGs, and I have a scorecard against the 5 dimensions. And it's part of what we share with our clients so that they can create that dashboard or that communication that, hey, we're really leaning into these 17 sustainable, or 5 of these 17 sustainable development goals. And we're really leaning into personal well-being and environmental well-being or what have you. So it's a really cool tool, and the clients love it, so that they can see, where they're showing up as a barometer against the UN SDGs. So I think, yes, they can be overwhelming, but I also believe they can be very doable.
Yep. And it's taking a path and doing one step at a time.
Yep. Putting a stake in the ground of what you're going to do.
Exactly. Yep. And the first step is saying, hey, I want to do this. This is what I want to do. Exactly. And so I think that's really awesome. Okay. So what does safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experience mean to you?
Safe, sustainable. That's some loaded words. Safe, and obviously. Safe. I put my COVID hat on and how we had to deliver in the COVID world, right? Prior to people coming back. So to me, it's changing the way that we deliver food in a way that's more safe, healthy, not germs aren't exchanging. So, I always go back when I put my water bottle under one of those water sets, I'm just like, oh, I don't know if I want to do it. If it's one that goes into your bottle, you're like, no, thank you. So that to me is safe. And then sustainable obviously is looking at how you're ordering your food, how the quantities, the quality of the food, the where it's coming from. That I grew up in Vancouver. In my later part of my career, in 100-mile kitchen was what we lived in, right? Everything was how we did it in Vancouver. So that to me is sustainable. And then the last two, I forget what you said. Inclusive?
The last one is inclusive. Yep. Inclusive.
And it's offering variety. Variety is something that I think that we get really stuck in our ways sometimes as event professionals because we want to keep going as fast as we can to get things done. But we got to be mindful and thoughtful and purposeful about what we're providing for people to include all allergies, customs, religious beliefs, all of that stuff we need to be more mindful of because we are really catering to a global world now.
Yeah, we are. We very much are. And all three of those things fall into the 5 dimensions of well-being.
Exactly. Yep. And I'll never forget, this was one of my last tidbits, and I know we've got to go, but when we hosted the Olympics in Vancouver, I was amazed of the variety of food that came out of our kitchen because the different soups, there were 40 different soups a day. And how you can come up with 40 different soups a day is just mind-boggling. But our chefs did it. And it's just part of catering to global cultures.
So, Yep.
Cool.
Yep. That is cool. Yeah, we need to chat about that offline because I want to know more about that, especially since I worked that event.
I love that. It was such a cool experience, wasn't it?
It was I loved being in Whistler working for Paras as well. And one quick story on that, I met this woman who was in 8th place and she came back and won bronze in cross-country skiing and she has no arms. And I'm like, I saw her in the village and I'm like, you're such an inspiration because I can barely stand up with my poles. And you came back from 5 spots back and won bronze medal. And it was so inspiring. So
that's cool. Vancouver's actually looking to bid on the 2030 Winter Olympics now.
Oh, awesome. I will definitely do that. I will definitely do that. So, well, Rachael, thank you so much. I put everybody, you can get Rachael on LinkedIn under Rachael Riggs, and you can find her at Maritz Global Events as well. And actually, I should put that link up there for everybody to have that. So Maritz Global Events, I'll do that right now so everybody can find you there. And then the Wellbeing Network, is that only available for your clients or what is that?
We our clients, but also I can work with other planners and work with them through the design studio and engage through the Wellbeing Network that way. So just connect with me. I'm happy to support. There's a lot of different ways that we can support. We have our client base that we obviously support, but we can also do other work from design studio perspective. I couldn't think what I was trying to say there. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
All right. Yeah, we're here to help.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I will see you next Wednesday, right? Or next week in San Francisco.
For the Wellbeing Challenge.
I need to do that. Yep. And I'm excited because I have Bees in the D on the show next week. And I'll be coming from San Francisco but I'm highlighting Detroit because this guy has put beehives on 40 buildings in downtown Detroit. And the honey is being used in hotels. And so we're going to talk about all of that. And it's pollinator week next week. So he picked that week because he's like, let's do it during pollinator week. So I'm so excited about that. I know. So everybody stay tuned and Rachael, stay online with me for a minute. And everybody, until next week, stay safe and eat well. We're here every Wednesday at 12 o'clock and with another awesome person just like Rachael. So see you soon. Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.